Picture this. You're about to start class, coffee in hand, feeling prepared, and then the student asks, can we talk about what happened on campus yesterday? And that throws you off. So how do you navigate this conversation? Welcome to Off Syllabus with Manny, where we talk about the hardest parts of teaching, the ones that never make it to the syllabus. Today, we are focusing on frameworks faculty can use to guide dialogue with confidence and empathy. Our guest today is Janett Cordovés. So, good morning, Janett.
Oh, Manny, it's so nice to be with you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to dive in to this conversation today.
Yeah, so we met a few months ago where we work around civil discourse. You're from the Institute of Citizens and Scholars. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do at the organization?
Absolutely. So 3 years ago, I transitioned to the Institute for Citizens and Scholars into the senior program for college presidents for civic preparedness work. And that what that all means is to really work on a portfolio that centers civil discourse, First Amendment, ability to have tumultuous topics, working with the college presidents, but then all the stakeholders in between and having, institutional impact. And from that work, as that developed from 13 college presidents to 30 college presidents to 125, I think we're at, I transitioned into a strategic consultant and fundraising advisor role so that I could really focus in on the Faculty Institute, build out the measurements, follow the faculty, support them, and ensure that they meet the deliverables that we're looking to see in the field.
So you're mentioning like you have grown very quickly in a very short period of time. What do you think is the value that you guys bring around civil discourse? Like, what is how is are these universities using civil discourse and actually feeling that this is important for them to continue to expand?
Yeah, that is such a great question. I do want to say that as someone that's been in the project from inception, it did not feel fast, right? It felt very incremental because there was so much to build and consider and to tailor. But that gets to why I think we've been able to really hit the ground and have an impact in the field of higher education. Because presidents were coming to us and saying, like, we need your support, what the resources and the work that we're currently doing. Um, we're not sure, we need some direction. We need a confidential group of college presidents to discuss these ideas with, behind closed doors without the reporters to really flush out some of these ideas. And then everything that was happening socially and politically around, there was a narrative that higher education was indoctrinating their students in like leftist ideals. There was a narrative, about higher education and particularly faculty censoring students. Research came out that that's actually not what occurs. It's that students feel that they have to center because of peer pressure, and so then what can we do as faculty to mitigate that? So I think a few things were happening in the country and in the field of higher education that the field opened its doors to say, whatever we've been doing, we need to rethink and maybe start again or maybe refresh. Some of our partners said, we know we're doing this work, but we're so massive, like Urbana Champaign, that we need to do an audit, right? And we need to create a sequence to ensure that this is reinforcing that. And what's happening in the classroom is being reinforced outside the classroom, and then in, experiential learning experiences and et cetera, et cetera. And so, and then we're measuring that work and we're saying like, this is what we've moved, this is significant. Consider this. And I think that's landed really well.
And I love the fact that you're talking about presidents because often faculty feel like they are doing this on their own and it's sort of part of their concern in a bubble. But it shows like the expansion that you guys have experienced is partially because administration also feels like this is important and it's affecting their work and they want to protect faculty too. I have that positive connection between the two different groups, which I think brings a lot of value, and it makes, hopefully, faculty feel less isolated in this world. So I'm gonna move back to our frameworks. That's my fault for asking you other questions about background.
But that's a good, that reminds me, that's another reason why I think we've been able to have so many partners in such a small amount of time, is that we are pedagogically agnostic, right? And so that allows faculty, staff from the various areas of discipline and research, from political scientists to mathematicians, say, I can see myself in this work, right? And so we're not saying that deliberation is the best pedagogical approach. We're saying that's a tool if you're wanting to, discuss public policy, find a common approach, and maybe present something to your town hall. Deliberation is a wonderful tool. So is discourse. That's a tool, right? So is active listening. That's a tool. And so depending on the faculty, the curriculum designers, the teaching and learning specialists, the provosts that attend the meetings and want to participate in this project, we design the institute each year from looking through what the faculty and the colleagues need and want to dive into. And whatever we don't get into in person, we teach throughout the year, so that faculty working with first year students and faculty working in economics can come and take what they need and adapt it for their courses. And so I think that approach, that structure from the beginning, has really helped amplify the work, because we're not saying we're only going to talk about rhetoric and communication, or we're only going to spend time in debate, but we're going to talk a little bit about everything, and then we're going to go in depth into one or two of them, and then we'll build out the rest of it throughout the year, and you get to choose what you need as you consider redesigning your curriculum or designing a new course entirely.
Yeah, I think that's very important because like faculty have different styles. And it's very important for them to feel like nothing is being enforced to them, but actually there's a lot of diversity of tools that they can use and implement based on their subject or their teaching style or their belief about how discourse should happen in the classroom. So I really appreciate that. So something we have talked at some point in one of our trainings together is about values-based leadership. I know it's something that you believe in. So can you describe a little bit about what that is and why you find it useful?
Absolutely. So sometimes I'll say many times when I'm teaching, I like to start with a framework that's broad enough that regardless of who's in the room, from a faculty member to a provost to a student to a community leader, can participate, right? And one of the ones that I really appreciate comes from a leadership framework that's called value-based leadership. And that's the ability to communicate authentically and transparently, and you're guided by your core values. So for instance, a core value to me is respect, right? And so with that, if that's the framework that I'm approaching maybe the hour or 90-minute conversation with, it allows me to define what respect means to me, why it's such a value, how I live it out, and how that will appear in this room. Right. So one example might be, respect is a core value to me. And I will treat everyone in this room this way. And one of the agreements that would be really important to me as we spend the next 2.5 days together or the next 6 hours together is that we don't interrupt each other. Right. Because for me, it just feels really disrespectful to have that. Right. So you talk about values and how they align for your work, how they align in your personal life, how they align to the institution that you've decided to work on and build your career around. And that really gives us space for storytelling, which is like such a powerful tool. And it begins to foster trust and honesty and empathy within those that you're sharing that space with. And easy, and almost 99% of the time, someone else in the room will say, you know, respect is a really core value for me too. But more importantly, like if we're only choosing one for today, it's freedom. And this is what freedom means for me. And this is how it shows up in the space. So we start making connections for those that are in the room. And so I've really have enjoyed how values-based leadership, utilizing that framework, has been helpful for any entry point into the conversation, to start practicing listening, to start practicing and articulating what we mean by the things that we're saying and what they look like and can look like in the room where we're going to teach and learn and eventually get into some sticky topics.
And I love that how this framework has multiple uses and it's not very specific to any discipline. You can sort of modify it to apply to any scenario, which I think is fantastic. So I want to ask you a follow-up question about this. So one of the problems with values is like values might mean different things to different people. So how do you move from this idea to become a working definition that everybody understands what that value really means?
Yeah. So there's lots of exercises that you can do. But one that I love to really get at this values comes from a partner organization, Essential Partners. And they have this exercise where you put up, 20 or 30 values that you've decided on that are important, right? Like anything from like honesty, community impact, right? And that in and of itself starts to change the conversation from positions and like affiliation to purpose, right? And it starts to become a little bit more of a purposeful, meaningful conversation. Um, and then you ask everyone in the room, choose your top 5 or choose your top 3 and rank them in hierarchy for yourself. Currently, in today's day and age, right now, as we sit in this space, what are the top 3 and in what order? Right? And then spend some time with 2 to 3 colleagues defining what you mean by honesty. So does that mean a brutal honesty? Does that mean honesty with a lack of care? Does that mean, right? And that might be it, right? And so we show up to the space, right? And we get to define that for ourselves. But it's really important because our values shift. Our values shift depending on situation. So although honesty might be number 1 for me today, it might go to 3 if I'm talking about how I'm going to engage with my niece or maybe my spouse, right? I might use I might use a different approach. But it gets to help, again, make the person in the room personable, approachable, start to make connections. And it moves, like when you hear civil discourse, you're like, okay, we're coming into the room and we're going to debate. And we're saying like, yeah, debate is a tool and we can definitely debate and we can frame that work and we can come to, we can do this binary, like there's going to be a winner and a loser. That's not what we do at CNS. We want to nuance, we want to complexify the conversation. And so using this values-based approach helps to shift the conversation from like position. I'm a, female. My PhD is in leadership. I'm conservative, which then means that I'm Republican, which then means that I voted for Trump, when that doesn't have to be the case. Though that's a lot of things that are being conflated. And so it helps when you talk about values to move, it helps move us mentally from like this like the stereotyping and the bias and the simple thinking that we say we don't want, but we do naturally. And I think we do it in under like 0.06 seconds. It's just like we judge, right? And so it helps us move from positions to and affiliations and like limited simple thinking to like purposeful and complexity. And so that's the one exercise that partners at Essential Partners have taught some of the faculty, and that has always yielded really, really great results.
Yeah, and I love it because like when we're working with individuals, it's not just about their personality, what might affect the way you approach the values, is also the different subjects, right? So It might be easier for somebody to talk about gender, but it might be harder to talk about political views. It might be harder to talk about ethnicity. So there's like different definitions based on the topics that you are exploring in that classroom. So this is like a fantastic framework, and I love this. But this is only one framework. There's a lot more frameworks that we will explore. So if you want to learn more about the rest of the frameworks, please stay tuned for the next episode about frameworks. So thank you for listening today.